The Simpsons.
Hello and welcome to I Helped Make That. As you can see, the guy on the right of me has a Santa Claus hat, and I am wearing a Homer Simpson on jet skis t shirt. You don't know what that means? To conclude our Christmas series of interviews, we are talking about a Simpsons Christmas special. But not just any Christmas special. No, we are talking about Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, the very first episode of The Simpsons. So, yes, everyone, if doing an episode of Santa with Muscles turns you off, and I don't really blame you because that's a terrible movie, well, we are talking about something good now. All right? We promise. But before we begin, let us get the anchor ad out of the way. So, if you want to create a podcast, what can you do? Should you use Zoom? Should you use StreamYard? Should you use Zencaster? Well, you can use those, or you can use Anchor because it is the easiest podcasting platform to use. All you do is sign up for an account, then you can stream on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those platforms. So, if you want to create your own podcast, try Anchor today. Thank you, David, for coming on to the show.
My pleasure. I hope you like my pantomime additives to the ad that you have.
Well, thank you. Anyway, David, how did you get hired to work on The Simpsons?
Well, that's a story that goes back to a film called One Crazy Summer, Savage Steve Holland film that starred John Cusack and Demi Moore with animation, 10 minutes of animation, directed by Bill Kopp with work from Wes Archer, Tim Bjorklund, and myself, and assisted by Jeff Myers. And that started in around middle of 1985 and continued into 86. And it was a fun 10 minutes of animation, which you can find on YouTube. And as I say, Wes Archer was one of the animators. So he had worked previously at some point for a small company called Klasky Chupo. And Klasky Chupo got the contract for the Tracy Ullman Show animation, which was to animate Matt Groening's little shorts called The Simpsons and M.K. Brown's little shorts called Dr. Jazz Badatu. And that's how I got connected. Wes basically got myself and Bill Kopp involved, and we started working on The Simpsons in March of 1987, and the M.K. Brown series as well, which did not last. That lasted for about 8 or 9 episodes, and The Simpsons shorts on the Tracy Ullman Show lasted for 48 episodes that were animated. At the end, by myself and Wes Archer, Bill Kopp left to work on Eek the Cat with Savage Steve after the first, I'd say 18 or 16 episodes. And that's how I got involved at the beginning. And from 87 to 89, we did the shorts. And around the beginning of, April of 89, we started working on production for the Simpsons series. And that's how it all came about. The first thing I did was work and design the opening title sequence. And Wes worked on sort of nailing down the characters in model sheets.
Okay. So I was always curious about this. I knew The Simpsons started off on the Tracy Ullman show, of course. But what I thought was interesting was in this episode, the pilot, they call it the Simpsons Christmas special at the very beginning.
Yes.
So was that done, just in case they decided they didn't want to go to series to just like make it a
No,
one-off special?
not in the least. Far from it. What happened is originally that was not going to be the opening episode. That was episode number 8. If you look at the production number, it says 7G08. The first show was going to be, uh, uh, I think it was called Some Enchanted Evening, and that was with Miss Botts, the babysitter bandit, which ended up being the last episode. I mean, it's no secret. You can look this one up. It's all over on any article in Wikipedia. But that was going to be the premiere episode. It ended up being the last episode through production problems. I ended up redirecting it and doing about 70% of new animation for it. That was the last show I did that season. But the first show I actually directed was called Bart the Genius. And that was number 2. And the second one I directed was episode 5, and that was Bart the General. And the third show I directed was this one, which was going to be a Christmas episode. It ended up being kind of a kickoff episode, if not the premiere for the show. But it was decided through production that everything else would be delayed for later. And instead of airing the series at the beginning of I think of November or something like that, of '89, the series would start and premiere on January 14th, 1990. However, we'd have a Christmas special, now christened a Christmas special, as a way to get things rolling ahead of time to get interest in the series. So that's why it was isolated and called a Christmas special. I think. I wasn't around at those decisions.
All right. Now tell me, what were your duties in directing Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire?
Well, I was directing it. And you direct animation like you, I guess, direct anything else. The interesting thing to me, we'll get at that into a second, but what I think was interesting is because this episode was not really written specifically to be a premiere episode. It actually worked very well as a premiere episode in many senses because it kind of casually introduced characters as if you were already familiar with them. And it sort of got out of that sort of premiere-itis feeling of a premiere episode, like, oh, here's this character, and here's what we got to say about this character, and here's what we got to say about this character. So all that was gone, and you just had a story unfolding, and you sort of caught up with the characters as they came on the screen. And the way they were already written, because we've already, now this is the 8th episode, I think there was already a comfort about how the characters and how much we knew about the characters in terms of writing and even in animation, that it had a more natural feel, and it made for, at the end of the day, a better starting off episode. Um, and that in some ways was a lucky break. As for me, directing the episode, well, I don't know, we can go into about the details about directing animation, but it's pretty much about, so it's no different than directing anything else. You have to think of what the shot lists are and how you're going to compose scenes and how the performances are going to be and what are the designs going to be and what are the clothing look like and how's the lighting going to be and, all that kind of stuff. But it's everything. And I actually had a lot of pressure on me because although every other show was delayed for an extra 2 weeks, which gave us sort of like a relief, mine wasn't. So this had to come out at a certain date. So I had real interesting pressure on me to get it done right, but everybody had confidence in me. So that was appreciated.
Mm-hmm. And then, then tell me just in a bit more depth, like if you saw the Tracy Ullman show episodes, like Lisa was a bit more of Bart's partner in crime, but even in this episode, you start to see her developing more into the smarter, responsible one of the two.
Sure.
Um, so was it literally like when the show began that's when you decided to make that change?
In a sense, actually, it started with the opening title sequence because, yes, in the Tracy Ullman show, Lisa's character was not very well defined. Neither was Marge's. The most definition of character was with Bart and Homer, and in many ways, Maggie as sort of, a super baby, kind of like a Buster Keaton type who seemed indestructible. Um, but Lisa's and Marge's characters were not clearly developed yet in the shorts. And I had that kind of highlighted when I did the opening title sequence. I was working with Sam Simon and Matt Groening, coming up with the different jokes and gags for it. I didn't really have a joke for Lisa. We didn't have a character for Lisa. So I presented the board to everybody, James L. Brooks, Sam Simon, Matt Groening, and all the writers and all the staff. In a storyboard, and I was pitching it, and I had just a temporary joke for Lisa that I knew wasn't going to fly, but I had to have something for it, and I knew if I pitched that, then it would open up for discussion of what do we do for Lisa. So it did, and we started talking about it, and I pointed out, well, maybe she's playing in the band, and maybe she plays, guess what, the tuba. I wonder where I got that idea from. But I tell you, James L. Brooks said it this fast, as I remembered it. He said, well, I don't know about the tuba. I'm not sure about that. But what if she could play the baritone saxophone? In fact, what if she plays it very well? That could be your character. She could be the genius kid of the family that nobody appreciates. Boom. Lisa had a character. And that very day, I think, or not the next day, they started writing Moaning Lisa, where we meet Lisa and idol Bleeding Gums Murphy, and then she had a personality. So already that was being developed. As I say, that show was actually episode number 6, and this show, the Christmas show, was actually episode number 8. So all these aspects of the characters were already developed when the show came out as the quote unquote first episode, which again, to our advantage, because we had a very comfortable feeling of how the characters should be, and they just came across naturally without a lot of exposition or introduction or sort of like kind of, oh, we have to explain this to the audience. We didn't, because we didn't have time. We just off to the races. Here's the episode.
Okay, great. Now, speaking of Simpsons,
I'm sorry, just real quick. The other interesting is that we had already, by the time this episode was being, I was directing this episode, other characters had already been in episodes that had yet to air, like Mr. Burns and Mr. Smithers, who's you only hear, you don't really see. But characters that were introduced in this episode were Flanders. Patty and Selma are introduced in this episode, and of course, Santa's Little Helper is introduced in this episode, which is why when the show begins, you don't see those characters in the first 7 episodes, because even though they were introduced in the quote unquote first episode, they were actually, didn't show up in episodes 1 to 7 yet.
Mm-hmm.
Other characters, though, had been already done. We'd already worked with Moe and Barney and so forth, but. So it's again, interesting mix.
Yeah, and just a word of warning for anyone who has never seen that episode. You can tell it's the Flanders first episode because the younger Flanders kid has a completely different voice.
Hey, Mr. Simpson, you dropped your pork chop.
Exactly.
And
we had not introduced the church attitude of Flanders yet. That was a later development.
That too. But now I'm kind of curious. What inspired the plot of Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire?
I couldn't tell you really, because I was not in the writing room. The writing room was in the Fox studio in West LA, and our animation studio was more near Hollywood. I it wasn't like that. It was like we were working really hard on the animation. They were working really hard on the writing. So um, I think it may have started with an idea from Matt Groening, like the pageant of the Christmas pageant. Uh, I know Mimi Palms wrote the episode. I'm not sure how much of that was her initial idea, possibly, and then, or it might have been Sam Simons, who was a showrunner, initial idea. I'm not even sure how much was she wrote and how much was rewritten because scripts get heavily rewritten in the writer's room. So it's probably a number of people's ideas and experiences mixed in there with Mimi's script. So as far as the idea per se of like who came up with that, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I had the script and I had to get it done. That was my job.
Okay, so it's not so with the Simpsons, the animation and the writing department don't necessarily like how do I say this? Like they don't always commingle.
Well, it didn't. It improved rather quickly. That's just how it was at the beginning. I mean, we were literally making it up as we went along. We had no, it was just like, okay, writing staff's over here, anime staff's over here, and away we go. And how do we work this out? And day by day, we figured out and improved on things, and
Mhm.
season by season afterwards. Uh, but like I say, it was all new territory, and we were just figuring out. Basically, the train was moving, and we were sort of building the track as well as the engine.
Yeah, and that might be why I noticed in this episode Barney's hair is yellow.
Yep,
Like
yeah, and that was a design idea, and we just said, nah, we're just going to save that for the Simpsons from now on. But that's those were one of the things we had. Georgie Pelusi was our color stylist, and she had a lot to work to do in a very short period of time. Not a lot of help. So we were making decisions like that, and we saw it. We basically saw it when it came back in color like that. So, well, it doesn't really work. So yeah, we would make things like that would happen, and we would say, well, that'll just be on that episode. No one's going to notice or remember.
yeah,
Oh,
that happens a lot. I mean,
that
we all
attitude,
know.
that was the attitude in 1989, folks, before we had, everybody had access to all media. So we didn't know.
Yeah, let's not forget Black Smithers.
Well, that was one of the things too, and we talked about that was a mistake, and we talked about correcting it, and they just said, "Well, we don't really have the budget to correct it right now, so we'll just have to let it go at that." I said, "Okay, well,
Yeah,
you,
and of
it
course,
is now an explained anomaly." So,
yeah, and of course, in this episode, Mo has like brownish hair instead of the black hair that he would have later on in the series.
right, right, yeah.
Yeah, that's
So things basically we're evolving, but I always point to look at the early, well, Mickey Mouse certainly went through his changes, and so did Bugs Bunny. So did, if you look at the early drawings of Charlie Brown and the Peanuts gang, when the comic strip was first introduced in 1955, Calvin and Hobbes had a sort of, evolution. Same with
Mhm.
us. That's the way it is. Uh, Now shows come in more refined and sort of stick to with it, but back then, nope. We're just again making it up as we go along.
Yeah, and honestly, it's like they say, practice makes perfect. But even if some of the animation in hindsight could have been better, and some of the voices may come off a little awkward.
Oh no, it couldn't have been any better. We were just making it up as we went along. We didn't have
I
any
know.
time. We
I,
didn't have any time to make it better. It was
I
just as good as it could be.
sorry, I didn't mean it like that.
Sorry.
Sorry, bad wording on my part. I apologize. But what I was about to say is like, you know, even if what we know now of the Simpsons, some of those elements can come off a little off.
Well, sure. I mean, again, to my mind, you have to look at it historically as well as in terms of entertainment. And considering it's the first one aired, it was, it ended up being very successful.
Mhm.
It was a lot of pressure, and even when I'm thinking about it, because it's like, oh, it's going to be a Christmas special, and I'm thinking, well, it's been this great animated Christmas special. The very first one was a Mr. Magoo animation Christmas special. Was the first animated special really on TV, and that to me is iconically brilliant. And of course, Peanuts Charlie Brown Christmas special is beautifully wonderful and iconic. And so I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I just think I'm doing the best I can. We're trying to do a pretty good job, and hopefully it'll work out. So
Yeah,
that,
but
and part of it is like, people ask, about making decisions, and part of like, the thing that helps make your decision is the clock. It's like, okay, what do you think of this angle? I'm in. Let's go.
yeah, but
So,
what I was about to say is like, you know, uh, well, sorry, what I was about to say is that, even though, of course, we have all these things we discussed, like this episode in particular still ended up being such an iconic special, like even possibly right up there with the specials you've mentioned, or at least
I,
pretty close.
Well, I guess pretty good, but just like, it's just like fantastic. That's great company. I'm very happy. Uh, yeah, I was very relieved when how well it came out. In the very last scene where they come back to the house, that was actually redone. Uh, uh, in a sort of like the last minute Hail Mary. I think after we showed the animatic, I had a big rewrite on the how to wrap it up, in the last scene where everybody comes together. And I was like, oh my God, how do I do this? And I spoke to Richard Sakai, who's president of Gracie Films, the Jim Brooks's company. And he said, David, just cover the heck out of it. Just everything, just every angle, just so I did. I said, really? Do you want me to basically animate coverage? And he said, yeah, because we don't have any time to really think it out. So I had a rough idea how to board it, but I just kind of animated coverage for the first, probably the only time, because uh, we just had to get it out, and we didn't know how much we're going to use of this dialogue. But so I had like a master shot that I didn't do the entire scene, but a good chunk of it in a master shot. I had singles, I had two shots, and so forth, that I basically animated coverage. Uh, which was it worked out because we did kind of figure it out editorially, which you never do usually in animation in terms of that. As you know, it's a pre-edited and storyboard, if you will, and then you do the animation because you don't have it's very wasteful to animate coverage. But
Mhm.
hey, uh, it worked out.
Yeah, but it just led to such an iconic scene because it's established a character that a lot of people know, like Santa's Little Helper.
Yep, yep,
And
exactly so.
also I
Yep.
think that ending works because, like, if you think about it, it's a bittersweet ending. Like most Christmas specials would just have like something, completely go right for them at the very last minute. But here it's more just like they're pretty much in the same position.
Yeah.
But now they have a dog, and at least, they have each other and they have this new family member, and sometimes that's enough.
Yeah,
But
yeah, that's a very good point. And it is a happy ending, but not the sort of traditional happy ending, if you will.
yeah, and I think that's what works about this episode, you know, just as its own like Christmas story in particular is like it's just a more realistic Christmas story that many can relate to, struggling, financially over the holidays. You know, feeling like a failure for not providing for your family or just not
Right.
providing for yourself.
Well, this is where the reality comes in, I think, from the sense of writing, starting at the top with James L. Brooks's sense of storytelling and sense of dramatic comedy, if you will, and Sam Simon show running and Matt Groening with his, sensibility of what the characters are going to be like and what the world's going to be like. And that went down to the writing staff, and then it sort of like obviously it carried through with the subsequent episodes, you know.
Hmm.
So you
Yeah,
had resolutions, somewhat happy endings, somewhat hilarious endings, and suddenly, well, we just keep plugging along.
yeah, and I think so that's why I think it helps set the tone of The Simpsons, but also just even if this is like the only episode of The Simpsons you ever see, for whatever reason, uh,
You basically get the gist.
yeah, you get the gist of the show, but it just also works as its own you know, as its own sort of more realistic alternative to Christmas, to your
Yeah,
usual Christmas special
yeah.
or Christmas movie or Christmas story.
All right. Well, that's great. It's great to hear that. Yeah, it just worked out.
Hmm.
When I think back at the time, I remember being very happy with certain things and just being under a great deal of pressure. It certainly helped to have Rich Moore, who became a tremendously great animation director, doing the storyboard. So that worked out immensely in my favor. And
Yeah, and
he,
Brad Bird worked on this episode.
yes, he did. He did. He provided a good deal of advice. And yeah, it was great. Obviously, great to have him and involved with the show in the first seasons. It was just terrific.
Yeah, and you still work for the Simpsons now. So before we
Yeah.
go, like, just out of curiosity, like, how has it been working on this show for over 30 years?
Well, it's remarkable. I mean, you never expect, certainly at the time, even at the time, I did take a sojourn because I thought this couldn't last forever. So I ended up working at DreamWorks and fortunately there, and fortunately at Pixar, and had a great time in both studios, and I learned a great deal, which was very helpful when directing the Simpsons movie, of course. But yeah, the idea that this show has lasted so long and being involved with it to this day is just a tremendous gift, and I never second guess it or question it. I'm just grateful for
Yeah. Yeah, anyway, before we go, David, do you have anything to plug?
it. Well, yeah, actually, I do. I've done a film with another former Simpson director, Raymond Percy, that was written by three Simpson writers, John Frink, Rob Lazebnik, and Joel H. Cohen. It's called Extinct, and it's been on Netflix for about a year now, and I recommend it. It's a very well made CG animated film, a lot of fun, terrific animation from a company called Cinesync in Montreal, also in Vancouver. Also, coming up on Disney Plus is yet another Simpsons short that I've been fortunate to direct. It involves the Andrea Bocelli and two of his musical children, and it's coming up on the 15th of December.
Oh, so it's another Simpsons Christmas special.
Exactly, albeit a 3-minute one.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thanks, David, for coming on to the show. That was I Help Make That. And everyone, I wish you a happy holidays, and we'll see you all in January.
Bye bye, everybody.
Shh.